Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Advisory Finance Committee meeting number 14 for fiscal year 2023. Today is January 9th, 2023. Pursuant to Chapter 107 of the Acts of 2022, this meeting will be conducted in person and via remote access in accordance with applicable law. This means that members of the public body, as well as members of the public, may access this meeting in person or via virtual means. In-person attendance will be at the meeting location listed above on the agenda, and it is possible that any or all members of the public body may attend remotely, with in-person attendance consisting of members of the public. The meeting may also be accessed remotely via the link posted. When required by law or allowed by the chair, persons wishing to provide public comment or otherwise participate in the meeting may do so by in-person attendance or by accessing the meeting remotely as noted above. Additionally, the meeting will be broadcast live in real time via Westborough TV, Verizon Channel 28, or Charter Channel 192, and concurrently recorded, and as soon as possible after the meeting, posted on youtube.com/WestboroughTV. Thank you all for coming. We have a full agenda this evening. I noticed that we do have members of the public present. Is there anyone that would like to make a comment? Hearing none, we'll move on to the first order of business, which is approval of the minutes of December 10th, 2022. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Okay, we'll do a roll call vote.
Andrew, yes.
Okay. Melanie is out tonight.
So is Andrew.
Dolan, yes.
Leslie, yes.
McMahon, yes. Shafford, yes.
Moretti, yes.
6.
Okay. First order of business tonight is to hear from the school department. Superintendent Amber Bach is here along with Finance Director David Gordon, and we're going to take a look at the school budget that was approved by the school committee and proposed for the town. Amber?
Right. Good evening. Let's make sure these are working. Can you hear me? I know Andrew is probably picking me up in there, hopefully. All right, so good to see you all. Amber Bach, 10 Arch Street, Superintendent of Schools. And it's a pleasure to come here and start the process of discussion. You know, we'll have several passes at this, both to answer individual questions, to answer committee questions, and to work together to move towards the completion of support and finalization of the budget before town meeting. I think given the complexity of our budget and the range of questions, given the multitudinous of budget sources and just the management of the school district budget, it always merits a couple of conversations with you. So I want to thank Mike for bringing us forward early, and I want to thank Mike and Beth for doing a nice job to pay attention, to follow along during the meetings, to check on the various presentations, and to ask good questions along the way. So this will be the 6th kind of general presentation of the budget. So I tried to create kind of a synopsis presentation. So it's a first pass, and I think tonight, if you have questions we can't answer, I think it's just important to know that we'll surface those and head towards being able to answer them at the summit, which is coming up. And it's a chance for us to see where your areas of questions are so that we can be most prepared coming into that larger discussion. So it's kind of an open process. I'll take you all the way through it, and then we can go back and talk more. You also have your budget books in hand now, so you can wade through those, and it's always helpful. If you have questions, we can direct you to that portion of the budget, and you can check it there and then follow up with us. So I'll dive right in. And this is a presentation that becomes part of, again, a multitude of presentations kind of pulled together. So I'm hoping that it makes sense to you. We're going to do a timeline and goals review, just a little bit of what we've covered, nothing too in-depth. I'll give you a quick review of 23. Kind of that becomes the framework and the premise of the work towards 24. We'll look at the 24. We'll study a little bit on cost centers, although again, you've seen that along the way. I hope you've been able to stay up on at least reviewing the presentations we forwarded, and you'll see the decisions we made working with the Westborough leadership team before we came into final recommendations. I'll outline kind of known budget impacts and talk about how we worked to manage those in the final recommendations, and then some final changes that were made to the budget before the school committee accepted and voted their approval of it right before the holiday break. And then that recommendation, as well as the start of some emerging comparison analytics. We try to work on those towards the budget summit and then also towards town meeting. So we have a presentation that gives people answers to questions about how we might compare with other districts, where our numbers come in, and it takes us a little time to start to pull those together. So I have a couple of those I'll highlight tonight, and then I'll take the list of ones you want to know about, and we'll let us work to prepare those. We always work with a focus of maintenance of excellence. We are an academic institute that prides ourselves in graduating students who contribute to both Westborough, but then can move into lives beyond school and have successful opportunities to develop areas of interest that they have found they're passionate about. We send kids off to high performance colleges, to trades, to a vast array of things that are important to them, and that remains the center of our job in working with families. We work always to keep it as a process centered on respect, investment, and collaboration. We want people to feel that the money they're investing in their community has payback for them, and we want to really stay in a place of respect and collaboration around developing that budget. And we're always trying to be innovative and forward-thinking. So let's just do a quick review of 23. I think you'll remember it well. I know you guys pay attention. The history of 21 and 22 we worked on together, both in looking at COVID and coming forward through some tough budget cycles. Over those two cycles, we cut a little bit over $1 million out of the budget, working over those 2 years. And areas that we've really worked to see responding to within this budget: technology, facilities, trash and telephones, electricity. You're going to see those as areas that needed real increases coming into 24, given the fact that we've level funded those over multiple years and then cut them specifically in these 2 years. Last year, we did return $64,000 almost to the technology budget, trying to recover close to $200,000 in cuts that had happened over the past several years. And technology really is the lifeblood circulatory system of our district, if you think of it that way. It carries all of the curriculum delivery, the core operational services for students and faculty every day. So it remains an incredibly vibrant and expensive and continually changing part of our budget. And John Green does a beautiful job to keep a razor thin eye on that and to spread his costs effectively. So when he looks towards returning several $100,000 into his budget, we'll talk about what our goals are for that. You can see over the last several years that our budget history, there's a wide variability in the percentage increase that we need year over year. And that's because the district defines what it needs each year based upon the funding sources, the backup, the information, and our costs based upon contracts and projects and all the different things we're doing. And you'll see budgets that have ranged from low twos to last year when it was 5.5%. And then we had to come back, and we added additional funds due to that tuition explosion that we had that actually brings 23 to the 6.67 amount, inclusive of that town meeting vote. And you see that on the right there. We level serviced all of the cost centers again. Total operational costs and maintenance were mostly contract rollovers and buses. And you see that the hit in special education was the 631,000 of the return for support and the circuit breaker gap that we faced, which is always where we start calculation of our budget. And you'll see that it's more advantageous for us in this 24 budget coming up. You can see there's the 63,000 we returned last year, and then a modest increase to costs in athletic funding. So much of athletics is funded in offset the student revolving accounts and other things. We don't typically raise that budget very much, but last year we just recognized the impact of all of the referees, costs, and all of those, and she asked for a modest increase last year. So that brings us into the development of 24. That's just to jog your memory, get you thinking about where we've been, and we'll look at what built the budget of 24. The first thing that we called out, and it's something that's getting ongoing discussion across multiple communities, was that the operational costs for services is set by a state organization for all of the services and contract work that we do across public service maintenance work and contracts. They came through this year with a startling percentage of increase at 14%, basically telling all the service delivery and contract rollover related to our industry that they could do 14% cost increase for us to anticipate. That's a large number across lots of contracts and certainly causing a lot of dishevelment to people's budget planning. And you'll see that we tried to both acknowledge it, call it out, and be strategic in where we wanted to apply that 14% and then do what we can to manage costs. Certainly, they have a rationale for it. We won't go into depth on it. We just have to respond to it and be prepared. It certainly echoes some of the cultural norms of what we see for tuition increases, though, that we get those increases and we don't get to participate in the conversation of them. We just get the bill. So it's kind of one of those pieces. And this year, you can see over the years that these contracts and these group bids have been, for the state contracting, have been advantageous because they kept those very tight. And now all of a sudden they hopped in here with this 14%. So certainly unanticipated when you can look at all the past years of 10 years of very low percentages. We're certainly, as an industry of superintendents and school committee members and working with our representatives, pushing for them to responsibly give us better offsets to this number anticipating the year to see if perhaps they come through with a one-time offset. We haven't heard anything yet, but we're certainly lobbying for it. I'll be attending meetings between now. Our budget cycle is much faster, so some of these towns are just queuing up to press on their state reps now, but we'll be participating in that. I also want to call out one of the other large areas that you have to think about for us, as these are kind of like unanticipated or undetermined is how I classified putting them together. One, this 14%, and then two, knowing that we're in open contract negotiations with all of our units. So we believe we can advantageously settle these contracts working collaboratively. We're very fortunate to have strong relationships with all of these units, and we currently believe that we have met our contract obligations in the budget that we have presented. So knowing that we had the 14% to think about and knowing what we faced with special education this past year, we looked at the student services budget, total budget, and looked at two funding options that we had to make decisions about coming into this budget cycle, whether or not we would take the whole student service budget and fund 14% increase on it, which would be the 463, 451, or whether or not we wanted to just selectively apply the 14% increase to tuitions only for out-of-district placement and then continue to level fund her overall operational budget. The other area that we had to look for in the development of 24 is always the circuit breaker, which is the state funding that falls to the school budgeting side that we have to use in order for cost savings. So you can see here that the current, bless you, the current fiscal circuit breaker came in at $1,866,50. That was a $400,000 increase, which is very advantageous. Any increase is very helpful. You can see that we then budgeted $400,000 for unanticipated tuition costs, looking at the cycle of budgeting for what we knew we were facing this current year in tuitions. And you see then that we applied that, and we have the $928,000 in our favor in terms of budget costs. And you'll see that helping us on the sped budget and other budget totals when we get to the end here. I can come back and we can talk about these details. There's a couple pieces at play there. I mean, the $400,000 and getting you to that 928 advantageous number is the fact that our out-of-district tuitions appear to be down again. So that's an annual decision. So when you look at that anticipated out-of-district funding, it's also about $400,000 less. So the direct, I'll call it funding available, it's not savings, but budget funding available to apply against the budget, that $928,000 is the direct effect of the increase in circuit breaker and a decline in anticipated tuition costs. And that is at the same time budgeting $400,000 to carry for unanticipated placements that again could happen. Another area that we looked at was technologies, and you'll see that we returned about $200,000 into the technology budget because he also has a Wi-Fi update across the district that needs to happen in his planning, and that's anticipated estimated cost of about $100,000. The other additional $100,000 was the remaining return to original funding that we hadn't added back in with the 63. So you start to see where we were developing our budget. We did a 2% increase across all of the school budgets, anticipating that they're going to face, again, in their purchase of all of their supplies, that 14% hit. So all of the companies we order from, all of them are going to be weighing in at higher costs. So we've level funded all of the school building budgets at level for at least the last 2 budget cycles, if not 3. So we went ahead and applied a very strategic and small 2% increase to all of those school budgets so that they could anticipate those increases. You see student services coming in at their cost increase. We selected, after a lot of discussion, the higher percentage of applying a 14% increase across her whole budget. You remember back to the slide I showed you. We could have done just out-of-district tuitions, which would have been slightly lower, or we could have applied a 14% increase to her whole budget, and we went with that, trying to build back, knowing that we suffered some unanticipated costs there that we don't want to face again. You see then some very strategics. You see the $200,000 in technology. 100 of that is, wow. 100 of that is the student service. I'm just gonna silence in that if there was any way that was me. That cost you see there, and you also see $60,000, which is for some curriculum work, purchasing of texts, and you'll see that we actually make a change to that a little later. So these are the cost areas that you see, basically the general operational and maintenance cost anticipated. Those are carried in your budget book as well, and you can see the adjustments, but this is where we were as we were coming into funding plans. So then we move into what was going to become our final recommendation. Here are very, very engaged, attractive, and kind seniors, a chunk of them. There's lots of them. But this year's senior class is a really great group, and they've been very engaged and have had a first half of the year that has been really stellar. Looking at buildings and grounds, they had requested a set of updates where you can see the majority of their updates, and you'll see this cut later. They had come in at, I actually have these out of order, but you can follow your money people. They had requested about $150,000 more. We actually came back in and strategically cut their budget, and you see this in this slide. The electrical and school increases are fixed. Leah provided the electricity cost for all schools based upon the contract increase, so a big part of that 500 is just the 200,000 in the electrical costs, which we'll see, and the fuel, which is also locked in at those increases. The other are strategic areas where, after doing a lot of work of lots of level funding, these are requests that they feel they need in order to basically meet the performance needs of all the buildings. So we came back in, and just, we can go back and forth on this, we came back in and cut this down from their original request, and this is the number we carried forward into the budget. They also faced, like we said, that $60,000+ and some level funding over multiple years. So some of this is recovery funding as well. So we went back into the technology, and you're going to see this coming into my final recommendation, and pulled the Wi-Fi update because it's a one-time cost. So we will fund that out of two sources that you'll see I comment on later, and it allowed us to pull $100,000 out of that request. Our district leaders had a whole variety of requests. We did fund the athletic. We really want a secondary athletic trainer. We talked about that in multiple meetings. Right now, that $45,000 is in there, and it's being carried off of the student activity funding. So student fees carry that cost. Armstrong, the school nurse, we moved it to a grant, so it's not being funded within budget costs. We declined the additional reading. And then Daniel Mayer, the assistant superintendent, came back in and worked on the district curriculum costs. The science textbook was actually then decided that they only needed they needed to carry $20,000 forward, and they need 5 for their just that 1 year of cost on the textbook, which is an online textbook, and the 15 for workbooks was a fixed cost, and that's for K-3 phonological awareness work. So he'll be carrying 20 as opposed to 60. These other costs we moved to other funding sources, so the $7,500 and the $70,000 are not in budget. We had the CPI anticipated for the transportation contract would be 7.3%. We decided to come in conservatively at 3% and try to do some cost-saving measures in really tightening down the runs and really going through, which we do already, every bill we get, we go through, and if they doubled up a run, we cut the secondary payment. So we really keep it very tight, and we've seen cost savings there, and we're hoping to be able to keep that advantageously the way we come at it, and that they're not going to come in too high, hopefully, and we'll carry the 3% increase of the 92.5. Other funding opportunities outside of budget allocation, we always take a $200,000 offset from community ed for their use of our buildings, electrical, custodial, services, supplies. They pay us for that use. Esther, we had $18,000 not used for staffing that will apply against cost. And our school revolving account of $150, we'll use it to pay for the Wi-Fi, some of the piano, and some of the furniture. Preschool tuitions is a stable account for us. We held 2 FTE, knowing that if we needed to, we would be able to put some additional people on that tuition revolving. We decided to go ahead and put an additional 124 against that and maintain space for 1 as opposed to 2. We also will leverage the IDEA grant a little bit more heavily for that, and that's a SPED grant that we get. So we went back in again and did a second look from my first recommendation to the final one that was voted by school committee. So where that led us was, again, cute children. Always like to remember this is why we do this work. We have amazing families and both complex and wonderful students. So here's where we landed. When we applied the savings of, or I shouldn't call it savings, tuition, the funding available from SPED, given that the circuit breaker went up and our tuitions went down, you see that the student service budget basically ends up saving close to $500,000. And we carried there, that's maintaining the 14% increase on her budget and the $400,000 for potential tuitions. So that $928,000 basically pulled her budget down to a much more advantageous place. And then you see we cut facilities by like $100,000 from their original request. And then you see that basically makes up everything that's in there. And then you see that I came in originally at a 4.62% request. That was when I still had the 60,000 in there, the 200 for technology, and a higher facilities amount. And then we came in and we did some additional cutting. We came in at the 4.1%. And that was the budget that was voted by school committee. So just to kind of summarize, we had circuit breaker funding and tuition savings. We increased the circuit breaker there. We got a benefit of $400,000. We saw a decrease in tuition costs that helped us. We maintained allocation of funds and her whole budget at 14%. We're responding to real concerns around building and grounds costs, knowing that 14% and just what it is costing us. We've seen this steady increase in impact of facilities costs. We were conservative, therefore, on transportation. We leveraged our grants more, and we believe we can meet our employment contracts in the budget we've put in front of you. Other data that I think is relevant that you often ask about, and I kind of put some raw numbers in here that just help you continue to wrap your head around the funding process for budgets. We spend about $7 million on grants and revolving accounts to support our budget, outside of our budget allocation request to you. And we get circuit breaker funding from the state that also lets us leverage another funding source. The town receives Chapter 70. It goes directly to the town for budget offset for them into their pool of budgeting. And annually, they're always guaranteed to get what they got last year. They won't get less. So that's a fixed growth amount for them. And they usually get more. So this year they calculated Chapter 70 at a 2% increase from last year, which is very conservative. They typically are coming in higher. Given the way that the state is getting pushed on right now about this 14% debacle, I might use that term, I think we're hopeful that the amount of pressure that we're applying, we'll see that you'll get that Chapter 70 number coming in more advantageously than the annual increase that it's calculated at by the town. But that's the number that Christie is carrying in her budget. Annually as well, we work very hard, and it's just a point, you've heard us talk about this. We do the Medicaid work to return funding to the town, similarly to how Pat Purcell at the fire department does a fabulous job to do the ambulance reimbursement rate. Same exact process, cumbersome but important to return funds where we can get repayment. To date, we've quarterly returned $200,000 in Medicaid for the town, and that goes directly to the town. That's through 12/31. I anticipate, the quarter that just came to us was like 85,000. So we're doing a really good job to press on that. We'll have 2 more payments. And those will come back to the town after. Those will just go to, they fall to the bottom line on the town side. I imagine they'll flow into free cash, I think, at the end of the year. And that's one of those numbers that helps to kind of refill that bucket. Again, you see here, I believe this is a 2nd grade classroom doing up close guided instruction with a teacher over at Hastings. So we always start to pull analytics for you. This is Armstrong PE, a bunch of little first graders under the large parachute. So our budget history, again, you can see moves with our needs. And this year, the one that you would have for 24 would be 4.1%, coming back down from the last, well, I mean, 20 and 21 would have been and were up at around 4.5 or more before we did our cuts. So, you know, in terms of budget cycle, given all of our contracts and everything that's rolled into this, we're feeling very, very solid on the 4.1%. And you just see the history there in the years. We always talk about per pupil expenditure. I know we'll come back to this. Per pupil expenditure is the all-in cost for schooling as it's carried at the state level. That is inclusive of healthcare costs. So the amount that is paid for school, faculty, health coverage, and for all of these towns is built into this number. And our per pupil cost remains really competitive for the quality of education that we are providing to the town. You can see here we're right in the middle of this bell curve. And that's the current. I just did this, so it's pretty good.
You don't have 2022 yet?
This is, no, I don't have 2022 yet. There's always a lag. They don't post all that stuff until, that's why the analytics really aren't tight until we go to town meeting, but it usually comes up before that. And so we'll update these. And this is most current. Dave just did this today. So these are preliminary. Not all of these are final. But he went out on the business listserv and asked where as many towns who were willing to like give us a number where they were coming in. And so there's a good amount of them that are our competitive kind of comparison communities. You see Belmont's coming in at 11. You see, looking at ones, Hopkinton's at 8.4 right now. Hudson 2.75. Northborough is at 5.9. Shrewsbury is at 4.75. Southborough is at 3.94. We're at 4.1. So it looks like preliminarily we're coming in, you know, similarly, and you can see that there's a lot of districts certainly well above us. They haven't brought their numbers to town meeting yet, but certainly, you know, ours is now a hard number. So we become their benchmark actually, which is kind of nice. They don't appreciate it. They often, you know, push on our number. So that's it. So sorry, you were very diligent. That's our first round, and I'll open it wide open for discussion.
Questions?
Thank you for putting that all together. I did read quite a bit of it, and there was a lot to read, so
You
it was
are-
quite the
You are
homework
so
assignment.
diligent, Rod.
I guess what I'd like to hear more about is the 14% as you described debacle, and what exactly that means. What of the 14% that they're anticipating increases are we committed to, versus is that just a benchmark that we could anticipate? Could it come in lower? What does that 14% commit to?
Sure. And Dave might have to help me out as we go. That'll be all tuitions, the most expensive, you know, of the set. They often come in that high anyway. But to see it applied to the goods and services contracts across all of our purchasing for supplies and our contracts, like our copier contracts, some of those are fixed, so we try to fix them when we can, but that means all of our paper on bid process, all of our supplies, all of the contracts related to goods and services for the buildings and grounds, plumbing, lawn care, all of it, that they are in those state bid lists, and the state bid lists are usually kind of capped at a tight increase, which is what makes them advantageous. And they've been given permission to rise by 14%.
Does that mean they automatically, so when somebody bids something, does that automatically mean everybody gets to increase their bid by 14%, or do they go out and rebid it?
Well,
and
I think
this
it's no, we don't get to go out and rebid any fixed contracts. And right now, given how the 14 came in, any fixed contracts would be advantageous for us to be in. But the contracts that are going to be like annual by this fall when we do all of our purchasing, well, by July 1 when we start all our purchasing, they will go up anywhere between, up to 14%. Until we see where those costs hit, they're not, we raised, for example, we tried to be strategic. I would imagine that school supplies would go up. I think it's mostly gonna be all the supplies for cleaning, all the bulk order stuff that we do, paper, things like that. The smaller items were like when you order from Staples, like those things aren't going to go up by that amount. And a lot of that ordering happens at the building level, which is why we gave them a conservative 2% increase, that they can kind of absorb some of those changes. And they do most of their building-based supply orders. But like the bulk orders for like the art department, fine arts, it's mostly service contracts that we're concerned. And those are the big hit every time you get a bill for the plumbing company or those types of things. Those we anticipate will be heavier. They've already been higher, which is one of the reasons you saw when Bob and Kelly, director and assistant, did their estimates. They came in kind of close to that. When they ran all of their stuff from zero-based work with David and presented their budget to him, when he put a 14% overlay on it, they were very close. We were a little bit lower. And then we cut them by 100,000. So, we're trying to roll that back and anticipate that that's not going to be everybody. But it's certainly going to be a good number of them.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Walter?
Yeah, the possibility of more state assistance because of the 14%.
Yeah.
Is that envisioned as, say instead of 75% circuit breaker, maybe you get 78% or something like that? Or is it envisioned that it's like ARPA funds and they just drop a bucket of money?
No,
in
right.
each
That's a
town?
great question, Walter. They could do a couple of things. And what I think they need to continue to hear is they need to do something, whatever that's going to be. They've got money at the state level right now, and you've heard discussion of that. They have two places they can put it. Circuit breaker is already established. It would go to Chapter 70, so it would go directly into budget offset at the town side. And given that, I don't know how Christie and those guys, Leah, would manage that, they could take the difference in the gap and just put it against the overall budget if it came in higher by March town meeting, which would be probably done. Or they could just let the differential fall to free cash and work with it that way. I don't know how they would handle it. But I would imagine the money would come back to Chapter 70, which is where they have, that's historically what they've done. The other choice they would have would be to do like a one-time offset against the impact, much like the ARPA funding as your example. And then they would just do some weird formula percentage and give us a one-time. If they put it to Chapter 70, the guidelines of Chapter 70 is Chapter 70 doesn't go back down from their highest base number. They're not going to want to put it against that. I mean, they're nice and they want to be helpful maybe, but not that helpful. So I imagine they'll do an emergency offset potentially. That's, I think what arguably the negotiations are going to be people other than me that'll be up there doing that. So. Other questions?
Beth?
Thank you, Amber. I got most of my questions answered in person, so I'm good.
All right.
I had two more quick questions.
Yep,
please,
go ahead.
Rich, ahead.
And these are more general and being new too, but when we look at salaries, it doesn't include the burden. Doesn't include the burden, the insurance and that sort of thing? And that's correct.
The health coverage costs are carried on the town side budget.
Right.
And the salary payments of all stipends, summer work, all the ways that teachers garner anything related to salaries in the school budget. So our salary number, that's that number. And that is basically cost for all FTE across district. However, when you see the per pupil expenditure comparison,
Yep.
so you can do kind of a more apples and apples, that number is inclusive of healthcare costs. So I think it's helpful to be able to see that even with that other large ad, that we're strategically still competitive as a town in the services we're providing. You know, I think we're a modest team, and we do not spend a lot of time talking about how incredibly strong the performance is overall in Westborough. But, you know, we sit in the top 10 to 20% on almost every benchmark you see across over 350 districts. And, you know, that means you're competing with performance and not as much on cost with some very high-performing districts. And we're proud of that. We don't hold it out there a lot. But when we're looking at budget season, I think it's important to recognize that our teachers are coming to you, and we keep our salaries as competitive as they can be. In our last 2 contract cycles, we remained committed to keeping them competitive. We did a big leap in the last contract cycle to get us back into a benchmark that was closer to our 3 neighbors who were outpacing us by close to $15,000 on average. And we're in striking distance to now be competitive across both entry and top of our salary when we look at this next contract. And that's moving towards hopefully ratification and in good shape overall, we hope. And we've got that number built into this request.
Yeah, mine was more of a general question, just why do we separate that out as opposed to?
It's because the town, the town does the health benefits. It's because they have to do them for the whole town.
Municipal accounting is.
Right,
Yeah.
so because,
Yeah.
because they bid it for every employee in the town,
Yeah.
they bring the schools in. And I think they get a better contract for it. And I just want to give a shout out to the work that Jim Malloy did over the years, and now Christy has continued, working collaboratively with a whole subcommittee, inclusive of school people who go and negotiate that with her to get really strong contracts overall in terms of the impact at the Westborough level. And keep strong healthcare, by the way. I mean, I think the services that are provided to municipal employees have been good.
I think with respect to the cost per student, this is where you see the cost of, you know, the add-ons
Yeah, right.
coming in.
right.
What's also included in there, and I think the state does it, is the debt service that we incur gets rolled into that cost per student as well. So I'm going to be anxious to look at the 2022 data
Yeah.
when the Department of Education and the Department of Elementary, Secondary
Yeah.
Education publishes it.
And the grants and offsets and other types of revolvings are in that total as well. So, you know, it could be that we're leveraging those or have more opportunity than other districts, and that's why our number's coming in more advantageously. You know, but it's hard to get into that granular level of their individual budgets unless you go in and compare all their end-of-year reports. And again, the end-of-year report, which we submit, is very, very granular and gives you all sorts of data if you want to data mine. I mean, that the annual year-end report's the best source.
It's a good performance measure. The problem is it's a year lag,
Right,
so.
right. So there's no new requests for positions in this budget. It maintains all of the current staffing allocations in terms of budget requests. That doesn't mean we don't, need to leverage a grant for a student para, or again, mostly hitting on the special education side is where you would see any additional funding, and we use the IDEA grant for that. So that kind of changes from year to year, but the FTE requests are stable.
Yeah, so while the FTE stays stable within your own schools, though, your principals or whoever decides these things might be shifting full-time equivalents around to meet
Yeah,
sort of the
so,
needs and-
yes, no, thank you. So we will track that and make changes. Like right now, we're carrying probably one move at the elementary level. Somebody's going to have to move around because when we do the class size averages, we wash it across the schools and look at it budgetarily. That's not how it really lines up, though, as you well know. So there will be somebody section-wise that will move to one of the other schools. And then Bryan is the place where you usually see partial allocations at the high school, where he might add like a 0.2. And so we would reduce somewhere else, and those allocations move around in-house. And in the years where he was growing, for example, we've rolled staff up from Gibbons with them, so the FTE moves around. Yeah.
I had one last comment.
Please.
I look forward to seeing the Fales electrical budget being zero. I know that's a
Me
debate right now
too.
with the
Me
town,
too. It's, it's on its way. I think, they have to get, I know you're into all this, they just have to get that glycol percentage to 20 circulating through the whole system. Then they'll take out the propane offset. And then you're also going to see then we moved forward to do that battery installation so we can store the offset so that we don't get charged that, what do they call it, Dave? I don't know the exact one, but it's the dust to dawn. Yeah.
When the sun goes down, we actually. Yeah.
So they
As
give you
opposed to
that and they
providing
give
the
you a
service
use
charge.
impact surcharge, yeah. So if you can level your offset of solar credits against your battery, then you don't get that surge and you literally get into 0 plus. I would say we're probably, we'll give you the update on the battery, but we're already gaining there. So it's kind of exciting.
I'm sorry, Mr. Savoy, but I can't allow you to ask that question right now. Okay. Amber, can you walk us through circuit breaker strategy? And also, I have a question on your transportation budget.
Sure. So circuit breaker strategy, it's an interesting term. It's more you're subjected to their numbers and you respond. But in terms of the strategy, we always apply the full amount against, let me just back up here, sorry. So circuit breaker is always a year behind. And so, for example, we're in 23 and we're submitting the needed reimbursements and tracking that, and that number will come to us at the end of this year, and that will be used to build 25. So the advantage of that is that you always have your exact number and it's not going to change. So it's an advantageous design for us, and you get a hard number and you then build off of that. We always are working to we calculate circuit breaker at its highest value allotted, which is the 75%. That's the best it's come in. And I think, we know that it won't go lower, so we just carry it at its full. Like when I arrived here, Irene used to calculate it at 40%. So she would hold back several $100,000 of circuit breaker for unanticipated costs. I think we've just shifted our transparency levels and the way we run that calculation. And as we've tightened down our requests, we've gone to full expenditure annually of that amount each year.
Has it come in at 75%?
Yeah, it did
Pretty
last
much the
year.
last
Wasn't
5
it
years.
75 last year, right?
It's been 75 for the last few years.
Yeah.
Historically, it's varied between 65 and 72.
Yeah, I remember it being lower, but that was
Yeah.
many years ago. So.
Yeah, to the best of my knowledge, it's never exceeded 75.
Right. And when it does come in higher, because of our tuition allocations, we always know ahead of time. So this 400,000, it's helpful just because it's then happening in real time and it's a hard number. You wouldn't want to have that much swing in your budget if you were waiting to get the number. It wouldn't be here by March. So.
On the transportation segment, what gives you the confidence to come in at 3% when we've got a little bit of a moving target on inflation right now? It just surprised me when I saw that. Can you give us your rationale behind it?
Sure. And Dave, you want to maybe help me here? You want to come on up? Dave does he does the yeoman's work on all this money, but he tracks the tuition and transportation.
So, for transportation, one of the rationales was we, over the last few years, as you know, due to COVID, we haven't been able to run a full year. So there are some credits due to us and things of that nature as we speak of this year. Currently, right now, we are running a bus short, but we also have buses running double runs, so there's some credits. 3% essentially is about $100,000 or $92,000, I think it shows. That is the actual cost to add another bus if we were to need it. When we do kind of almost a projected out of what it would look like if we had all buses running appropriately, inclusive of, actually it's really just AM PM service, because most of the sports runs I run at, we pay those out of the activity fee, revolving. So when we do a projection based on the AM PM service without having to do any double runs or anything like that, and based on the fact that we're running a bus short right now, we actually see that number being around about $100,000 increase. So the reason why we decided to do the increase of that is that if we were going to add another bus to the fact of the rotation of the AMP as service, it would actually provide us enough stability to say, if you're running full service AMPN with no double runs and your current budget supports that, if you needed to add another bus, what would that look like? So for us, we actually built in a little bit of a cushion based on what we project a full service run, which has been hard to do based on the billing, because we don't actually have a full picture of it, because everything's been through COVID with partial runs, double runs. And inclusive of that, we are mindful of the staffing issues that we're facing with buses. Westborough has become pretty much the model district for transportation. That's not a hypothetical. That is really kind of the state as it is. I know one of our peer districts in Framingham, they're actually down 17 buses. They've actually contracted 77 and only have 60 running. And of the 60, which is something Westborough doesn't deal with, of the 60 that run in the morning to start, there is always a variance of who runs in the afternoon. So they have 60 that run in the morning, but they'll have 52 in the afternoon. So for us, we've been in a very much kind of model district, being that we have a great partnership with NRT. NRT's very supportive of us. Our student population is, I would say, as they are
Really nice to their bus drivers.
as they are in school, they
Yeah.
are in the bus. So
Yeah.
I think Westborough whets their appetite for drivers to come. So we've been very fortunate. Again, from a funding standpoint, we feel that based on what we've projected or what we've seen financially over the last few years of COVID, what we projected would be a non-impacted AMPN service run in the ability to have an increase of around 100,000 would support us in a very appropriate place.
And to complement that, to piggyback off that, the other thing that happens is when you do, anytime there's a double run, we pull that money back. So there's the way that we run our billing with them and pay them, we're always going to end up on we're going to have a little bit of play in that budget, because we don't just pay those bills. And so across the span of the year, you're going to have a regular cycle where you've got a double run, as he's just illustrated. And so that funding kind of carries as a buffer for any other types of increases. How do they contract? I know this is where I shouldn't ask this live. What about the gas cost? Do they contract into
So that is actually built in a little bit. The way our contract reads is there's not actually an increase for a fuel surcharge, or fuel cost increase. So the 7% CPI increase is supposed to be inclusive of that. My likelihood is that if gas or petroleum costs would continue to rise, they would have actually approached us to renegotiate that part of the contract.
So you're not anticipating any
I'm
mid-year
hopeful that we
surprises?
won't. Yeah, I'm hopeful that we
I
won't
know,
see a
after-
$7
For us.
diesel.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that the other thing is, like, we push some of those onto the student activity account as we pay those sports runs and stuff. So we're trying to leverage those offsets, and we could absorb, something unanticipated within reason,
I think
so.
an
yeah.
additional factor related to unanticipated, knock on wood, I don't want to jinx us, but, even this year, when you look at facilities, right now, we don't have any plowing cost. You know what I mean? So we've budgeted that based on the number and things like that. So, our hope would be is that there is areas within the budget, if we had it to access outside of the revolvings, which, we utilize to the best of our ability, there are opportunities for us to make some supportive programmatic variations within the budget to support that, if in fact we did see like a $7 increase in petroleum or things like that.
And just one final thing, off transportation. You mentioned the revolvings, and I remembered, I had a question, just a clarification. Those revolving funds, they're non-levy funds,
Yes.
so they're under the sole purview of the school committee as far as
Yes.
spending is concerned. So
Yeah.
that's $7 million.
So that's a combined of grants and revolving
Yes.
is 7 million. The
Yeah.
revolvings, some of them have some language related to them. So for example, the community ed revolving has an actual language built into it that a predetermined amount of 900,000 should be left in that revolving. But anything that exceeds that, I would say.
Work with them for
work with them
purchasing,
for
leveraging.
purchasing and
yeah.
again, for any central contribution to help offset the cost of use of buildings.
Yeah, and I think traditionally, the tuition account remaining is the preschool account, and it's carried a good chunk of the staffing, and it has been helpful. One of the things that Dave and Sherry did working together was shift who we had allocated on those grants, and they put, it again, depends on who you carry on them, whether or not we have to carry the healthcare costs and what types of things happen. And so we've tried to really tighten down, making sure we're getting best use of those funds and maximum allocation of money for them, in the sense that if you're carrying paraeducators on the grant, we don't have to pay the health costs as well when the town's already carrying it. But on the grants, they make you hold it out, and then they take that money. So you're kind of like giving them back money that you don't need to. It's just weird glitches in grants like that, and the way that stuff works. So by putting paraeducators on there instead of teachers, we save some money. So it's the kind of stuff we're always looking at to try to, get the most we can from the funds we have.
Any other questions from the committee? Mr. Savoy, if you'd like to ask that question now.
Thank you. Wilfred Savoy, 21 Chestnut.
Please come up to the microphone so.
On the slide that showed the totals for salaries and expenditures, I don't know if you could show that again. It doesn't add up. There's a $200,000 shortfall, and I'm wondering if that is the offset dollar. I don't know if you can show that slide there for me.
Yeah, I think it's community ed, but let me just find it for you.
It says,
Is it there? Is that our last slide, Dave?
yeah, right
Yeah,
there.
Yeah, let me just send it to you here. Sorry, it moves slowly. Yes, I believe it's the offset. And in the budget book, it shows that we didn't show it in here, but it shows it in the budget
Yeah,
book.
that's right.
Yeah.
So if you add those numbers up, the salaries and the operating, it's $200,000, there's $200,000, the number is $200,000
Yeah.
less. So it's a little, it's question, why doesn't it add up? And I know it's $200,000, I know there's an offset of $200,000 somewhere in there,
Yeah,
Okay.
but
it should show.
it could be
yeah.
clearer.
Yeah.
let's put it
Well,
that way.
this is a preliminary meeting with
Yeah.
the school folks.
Well, it's the
So-
same as what you would see in the budget book for last year.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, that's
And
helpful.
we're
Thank
gonna-
you.
Presentation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, thank you.
We'll,
It'll
we'll,
be clearer.
we'll make sure that's
And
cleared
I
up.
think, and I'll look
Thank you.
back in there, but I think in the budget book we show it, and I'll
No, I
take a
have
look
it
at
right
it,
here.
but. In the presentation or in
Yeah.
the budget pages?
The budget pages for last year.
Yeah, the presentation,
Yeah.
yeah, all right,
It
let me,
was the same thing.
yeah,
Inclusive of community ed offset.
Okay, so
Okay.
that was for 2022.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so that was, okay.
Okay, so why don't can we do that offline?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
It's a
Okay.
So
team
we can get
effort.
the
Thank
meeting
you.
moving.
You're welcome.
Thank
Hey,
you.
I love that he's tracking it, and I appreciate the time and energy he brings to it.
Engaged
so
citizen.
That's
we
exactly
want.
what preparation for town meeting looks for, and it's
Yeah.
the job of FinCom to let people get into the granular of the budget. So I'm very comfortable with that, and I just want to let you know that if you can say we enjoy it, that might be a stretch, but we welcome it. How about that? You know, it's a complex process. Like you saw me ask Dave, like, where do they carry the bus gas? Like, you know, he knows certain pieces, I know certain pieces, and between us, we present, and the budget book carries all that detail. But school budgeting is very complex. The way the grants work, some carry over, some don't. Some you have to expend in the year, others you can carry them forward. You know, it's a process that we know takes time for you to wrap your head around. So maybe keep thinking and just forward us questions. And
Well-
I know in this budget book, to speak to Mr. Savoy's question, he gave us good feedback, and I know we amended the budget slide, the budget page in the book to put the total FTEs next to the salary delineation that's in there. So there's an improvement in there that, you know, gives you the number of people being carried against that amount. That's the type of feedback that's helped us to continue to refine the budget pages. It made me think back to my Ed Bain days, and he wanted to always align those allocations thoughtfully. So it's really helpful.
Thank you, Amber.
Yep.
We appreciate your time. David, thank you. Between now and the summit on the 26th, I'm sure after we have a chance to reflect on your presentation and digest the budget book, we'll have a lot more to ask.
Thank you, yes, and
So-
just if you want to keep forwarding questions, small
Yep.
or large, as you do that, we're happy to work with you on them, and
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thanks, guys, all right.
Thanks again for coming.
I have another meeting, so I'm not going to stay. I don't want to be
That's okay.
Thank you.
We won't think you're rude.
That exciting, really.
rudely bailing after we go.
Well, I'm wondering if Chris is gonna have any pictures of kids to show with his
Wait,
water outlet, you know, because
I do
it's
come with
be a little more, you know, the
Wait till you see your storm.
standing by the waterfall.
Hopefully no kids in the catch basins.
Those few
Yeah.
students are his children, so,
Yeah.
who are pretty amazing, so, good to see you. All right. take
Thank
care.
you, Amber. All right, moving on. The next order.
Yeah, I lost a wiffle ball. Did you find it?
Oh,
In the
catch
storm
basins.
drain.
Okay, all right, okay. Andrew has joined us, Walter. The next order of business is a review of the proposed stormwater funding program with by the DPW. Chris Payant, the director, is here with us. And Chris, will you introduce your guest? I apologize for not remembering
Yep.
your name
I'll
from
take
previous
care of all that.
meetings.
And also, I don't know who's managing the hybrid. Derek is probably trying to sign in, or might be. Whoever can let
Okay.
him, if someone can let him in.
It's an open meeting. They can come in if they're trying to join.
Okay. Okay.
They should be able to get in.
I'm gonna just say a couple of very brief opening remarks and then hand it off to our help here, and I'll introduce them. So the reason we're here is because over the past several years, the town, at the town manager level and other select board have been asking the question, what's a better way or a different way to fund our stormwater needs? So stormwater is a utility just like water and sewer, and there's a variety of ways to do it, and we're going to talk about a couple. In 2020, the select board gave a goal to the town manager to look at a stormwater utility enterprise fund and then present some options. To do that costs money. So over about 18 months ago, we received a grant. Part of that grant helped fund a scope of work that led to tonight. So tonight and a couple of previous meetings that we've had with the finance team and also with the select board have been really presentation of some of the analysis that's happened over the last year to help us discuss whether it makes sense to adopt a stormwater utility fund. So Rich Niles is from Woodard and Curran, RJ Dowling's from Woodard and Curran. They've been assisting us. They're going to present this analysis. And we're not, all we're doing is presenting options. This is a lot of work. It's not something we're just like, hey, let's just do this because we want to do it. It's a good option. I think it's a smart way to go, but all we're doing now is presenting the analysis. And we'll talk about next steps. Next steps would be actually giving some authorization to it, so saying yes to it, probably through a bylaw at town meeting, and then another amount of money to fund the implementation of it, which would take about a year or so. So this is a ways off. There's lots of opportunity for discussion, but this is the start point, and so tonight we're introducing it to you. Tomorrow night we have a second meeting with the select board, which will be taking it, to the next step. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Rich, and we'll get started.
Thanks, Chris. Good evening. Is it okay that it's not displaying here? Yeah,
We've got it right here in front.
Okay, all right. Clearly, I don't see that.
Yeah.
Okay.
You've got it right
Rich,
there.
your last name was Niles,
Niles, yes.
and it's Whittier and Curran?
Woodard and Curran.
Woodward.
Woodard and Curran.
Sorry, I gotta write the minutes.
No, it's okay. It's on. It's also on the slide.
Right in the lower right-hand corner.
Yeah, that's okay.
Never mind.
So this is a presentation that we did back in December for the select board. So some of this you had in your packet. We did add a little bit of little additional information based on some comments. I think it was from Rod specifically. So we'll do our best to address those comments and discussion. But I'll kind of go through it relatively quickly, and then get into discussion at a certain point. Some of this may be information you've kind of already seen. So I think Chris kind of covered the meeting goals for what we're trying to discuss, is really kind of present some of the findings from the study that was really looking at the needs for stormwater management and the increased costs. And then once we look at and acknowledge that there are additional needs and costs, the question becomes, well, how do we fund that? So really that's kind of the crux of the study at the end. But we did an inventory of assets. We looked at what are some of the program needs, met with DPW several times, met with other representatives from the boards, yourself included. These are really the kind of the primary program needs. So aging infrastructure, this is something that is, if we're facing in every community. Stormwater is the one piece of infrastructure, unlike roads. It's integral to roads, but we forget about it because it's underneath the ground. Water and sewer has a high demand of service, so people realize when that's out of service quickly, and they demand it be put back in service. Stormwater kind of falls to the wayside. Roads, yes, they can collapse, things like that, but they don't happen on sunny days typically. So we quite often forget about it and fail to recognize that, this is stuff that's been built 75 to 100 years ago in some cases, and it's aging. So that's one of the primary drivers. As we better understand the system, we better understand those needs. There are also growing regulatory requirements related to compliance, water quality related issues, Chauncey Lake and other issues you may be familiar with. So there are growing needs that every community is facing. And when we take a look at what the town has for assets, there's thousands of structures that need to be maintained and at some point replaced. So one of the things that was part of this study was to actually go out and do an assessment of culverts specifically. This was one of the things that DPW expressed one of the greatest needs to understand the condition of these assets. So we went out and assessed 155 culverts. We looked at condition and also in our analysis, things like what happens if it fails? What's the consequence? Is this a dead-end road, low consequence? And we kind of ranked those using the scoring criteria. There's 48 culverts that could not be assessed for various reasons. So just to get a sense of, there's over 200 culverts. And looking at this list here, this helped inform the capital improvement plan. So this is just the top 20 or 21 culverts. And if you were to do 5 to 7 of these per year, you're talking $500,000 to $1 million just to do that number. And that's still going to take you 4 to 5 years to get through that backlog. So the more we know, the better we can plan for that and prioritize those projects. So that was definitely an integral part to this program. And really is one of the more substantial elements of of what we feel are the funding needs or the funding gap. So what we looked at is a variety of programs to capture those needs, and really what the biggest gap is related to capital funding for construction, design and construction of projects. So we're looking at an average of about 1.5 million per year in additional need above and beyond what is funded through the general fund in Chris's budget. And a lot of that is, as you see, we kind of break it down into a few different categories. This is how we look at things from a program standpoint. So when we look at stormwater management, managing a utility, we try to put it into program categories. Operation and maintenance, capital improvement. So we really focused on capital improvement because that's the area where the money isn't just sitting there ready to go. It's based on individual requests historically. And we want to look at a more proactive and sustainable program to fund those projects. So I say 1.5 million, oops, sorry. And that's kind of where we arrived at what we felt was a modest program to make good progress. We know we have a backlog of projects, but when we look at the overall value of assets, when we start to look at capital planning at a really high level, you've got over $100 million worth of infrastructure in the ground. Some of this stuff was built a long time ago. Some of it's in good condition. A lot of it's not. And so some of it has exceeded its design life. And this table is just summarizing the same assets that I presented earlier and the replacement cost. So this is a fully burdened cost to replace that asset in today's dollars. And so that's how I come up with the number here. When we think of how we manage utilities, kind of standard metrics for water and sewer, sort of national metrics and guidelines are, a couple percent per year of your total value for capital renewal, replacement projects, capital projects, construction, and about 1% to 2% for operations and maintenance. So if you look at that based on your asset value, your program really should be somewhere in the $3 million range. And so a lot of programs for stormwater don't start there because it's a pretty big jump to go from, it's like turning on a fire hose. You certainly you have to be wise in how you want to spend the money, and typically programs will grow over time or will use that money in the beginning to leverage for other funding sources. And it does take time to get projects in the hopper for design and construction and permitting and such. So it's just meant as a point of comparison. We did look at various levels of service as part of the study. A very high level of service means we're going to get things done really quick. We're going to spend a lot of money. But is that really where the town should start? And we felt that something around a $1.5 million program was in the right ballpark to begin. And again, there's flexibility with that. We can discuss that in more detail too. So really, in terms of generating the kind of revenue to fund that additional need, 1.5 million, there's really just two options typically for a sustaining annual revenue. Is a tax increase, or a lot of communities have chosen to pursue implementation of a stormwater utility. And the primary difference with the utility is just like water and sewer, it's a dedicated funding source. It's a well thought out program, so we've looked at our needs and we said, okay, we have these unmet needs, we want to make sure we're managing the system properly, and we have the right program and funding in place. It's flexible, so we can use the money for capital. If something else comes up that wasn't planned, we can divert some of that money, or we can use that to leverage for debt service to bond some projects and accelerate the program. So it can be used in a variety of ways, and one of the main reasons a lot of communities turn towards this is it seems more equitable in terms of who pays their share of the stormwater cost and what's really driving that cost, and I'll get into that in just a minute. But the first one I think is having a dedicated funding source is probably one of the most important. It allows the town to leverage these monies for match and other outside funding sources. And we've seen that a lot with stormwater utilities. They haven't been around for too long in Massachusetts. They've been around the country for a long time. The first utility in Massachusetts was about 22, 23 years ago. Those utilities have attracted a lot of funding from outside sources, largely because the agencies like to see that you have dedicated funding in order for them to invest in your infrastructure as well. So when we look at the fundamental approach of a stormwater utility, what really drives the greatest need for managing the public system. So we have our drainage network throughout the roads, the public system. We have ditches, we've got swales, we've got culverts that convey flows between streams, stream segments. Impervious area, roof runoff, roof, driveway, pavement, hard surfaces, impervious areas. That's the primary metric that really drives the need for stormwater management. If everything just infiltrated, we wouldn't have to worry about collecting and managing stormwater, right? But it doesn't, and it doesn't certain times a year as well anyway. So when we think of the properties that contribute to the public system, contribute the most runoff, have the greatest water quality, a way to measure that impact is impervious area on an individual property basis versus taxes we use to assess value, right? But assessed value doesn't really correlate well with stormwater impacts when you start to consider really large properties that don't have stormwater controls versus a small homeowner who has a relatively high property value in relationship to their impervious area. So in many ways it's seen as more equitable, and you kind of pay for your fair share. Now, we can discuss fairness all day long, but that's, it's not a perfect system. So keep that in mind, is that you'll have people that will continue to say, well, I drain this way, I don't drain to that catch basin. But yeah, you use the roads, and you have two cars that park in a typical single-family residential home. It's a way to measure that's not perfect, but it's a better way than looking at property value alone. And there's a lot of other benefits to having a stormwater fee in place, where we can also then provide credits for properties that have invested in stormwater infrastructure on their own property that decrease the burden on the public system. So just to look quickly at the, sort of the reason a lot of communities start to gravitate towards this approach is you look at the number of developed parcels that have something on it built. And we typically, 500 square feet of impervious means there's something more than just a small shed on that property. It's developed for some type of use. The majority of the total number of parcels are single family. However, they represent a disproportionate amount of the impervious area. So non-residential parcels represent the majority of the impervious area, but the total count of parcels and value of property is pretty high on the single family. So when we think of ratepayers and who pays for their portion, we typically start to think of single family first, and then how does everything else relate to that? And that's how a lot of rate methodologies, rate structures have been developed for stormwater utilities across the country. So we looked at this approach for Westborough using your data. These are just examples of rate structures, and I'll get into the data in just a minute. But we look at a few different options. There's lots of different ways we can look at rate structures, and part of what we would do in next steps would be to refine that and do a final rate study, final rate setting process, so that there is a process to this. But this was the initial review that was completed, or work that was completed. A lot of, you'll hear equivalent residential unit. You'll see this with a lot of other stormwater utilities across the nation and in Massachusetts. And this sort of ERU method is meant to say that most single-family residential homes are kind of similar. They're not as big as a Walmart or another shopping center, but they fall within a similar range. Although when you start to slice the data further, you see that range is quite wide, and so we'll talk about that in just a minute. But it's a simple methodology that was applied, and it's a little bit dated because we didn't have really good data 25 years ago when it came to GIS data. So it was just easy to say, well, residents just charge them the same fee. They're all kind of similar. It doesn't make a huge difference. And then if you're 10 times the size of a typical residential property in terms of the impervious area, we'll charge you 10 times that. So that's the basic ERU rate methodology. You can apply rate multipliers, so you can treat properties a little bit differently, but you really still have to have some rational nexus between what their impact is on the system and what you're charging for that. So we looked at flat rate. This is something that has become a little more popular because the data is better. We can look at thinner slices of impervious area regardless of property type. So this typically looks at every property the same, residential, commercial, industrial, tax exempt, it doesn't matter. We're looking at units, a standard billing unit that I've seen around 1,000 square feet is fairly typical. And we look at the distribution of impervious area for all the properties in Westborough and look at what makes sense. You start to get much less than 1,000 square feet, that you don't see as much of a difference, and you're doing a lot of data management, and you have to have better quality data in order to justify what you're charging. So 1,000's a decent unit, so you know, it's very simple math. It does keep the rate methodology pretty simple, but it is a little more intense to manage. And at some point, people question, well, I'm not that much different. I'm only 1,000 or 1,200 square feet different. Why am I getting another billing unit? You know, so again, that's just another example. There's communities that I can show examples that do charge similarly for this. And then we also looked at a tiered rate structure, which is becoming a little more popular because it does start to recognize the differences between smaller properties to some extent, but then putting them into buckets instead of putting them into 1,000 or 500 square foot units. You do the analysis, but you still put them in a general category. And so this is a histogram showing distribution of properties, and I know the numbers are really small. You know, I put my glasses on, I don't think I can read it. But what it's representing is across the bottom is total impervious area, so thousands of square feet of impervious area. And then the histogram height is representing the total number of parcels that fall within that range of impervious area. So when we look at the distribution, well, a lot of them fall around 4,200 square feet, which is the median for all the properties. And this is single-family residential only. So single-family, the median is about 4,200. You know, we don't always have to use exact numbers. It's a little bit simpler to kind of round. So let's just say 4,000. So we can kind of look at, there's a chunk that's kind of small. There's a chunk that's in the median range, and then there's a kind of a larger group of properties. And so for your data, it seems to make sense, or for the distribution of residential properties, 3 tiers seemed about appropriate. You start to slice it any further than that, it becomes more complicated, and the differences between properties are subtle, or more subtle. So a lot of communities choose to go this route because people feel it's more equitable. I got small homes, you know, 2,000 square feet. It's a pretty small home. It's a small driveway, small impervious area, roof footprint, et cetera. And then you have some properties that are residential properties that are 6,000 to 10,000 square feet. So you're talking a quarter acre of impervious almost at that upper range. And then at 10,000 square feet, we start to look at it like, well, that's really not even, it's kind of the size of a commercial property. And in some cases, you know, 6,000 or 8,000 square feet might be the size of a small commercial property, depending on the business type. So this is a rate methodology that DPW and other town staff felt that, you know, this seems to be a good balance between kind of simplicity, something that's too simple, it doesn't recognize the differences and is not as equitable, to something that is more equitable, more complicated though, at the same time. So as equity in rate structure increases, typically it's more complex and a little bit more challenging to not only explain to the public, but also to manage. So there's a little bit of a balance, and there's a point where it kind of doesn't make too much of a difference in the basic rate methodology. Now we can get into exemptions, credits, we can look at rate modifiers, we can look at treating certain properties a little bit differently, but we also have to bear in mind that, you know, this is a rate user fee. We have to have a rational nexus between what your impact on the system or use of the system, just like you would for, you know, water. You measure water use, okay, you're using this amount, you're in this category for this reason, because you're a high user, you know, kind of thing. So you got to keep that in mind, and that these things can't be, you know, rate structures can't be arbitrary. You know, we can justify why we would give a discount to either a tax exempt or low income, fixed income, similar to what we do in other programs. You know, and you can create programs as long as you justify it. And I always think of, you know, once you go through this final process, just think of whether you would be able to defend this in court. You know, always be prepared to defend your methodology. So that gets into some of the fine details of next steps, but this is a lot to look at with this table. But this is just looking at that tiered rate approach and what type of property falls within each category. So across the top of this table, you see tiers 1, 2, and 3 for single family, and then you see all of the properties, and then that's broken down a little further. So tax exempt and municipal, just because I know people are interested in that. And we'll get into a couple more examples in a little bit. But we're showing the total number of parcels, the billing units, based upon a 2,000 square foot impervious area billing unit within that tiered rate structure. And so that 2,000 square foot becomes the unit outside of the tiers for non-single family or anything that's not single family residential. And so we're showing here is just the residential number, because anything else needs to be calculated, but I have examples, we can kind of go through that a little bit. And so your majority of your properties are going to be somewhere in the $57 to $115 rate. You look at the number of per year, per single family property. So you look at, you've got almost 1,800 parcels in tier 1, 1,400 in tier 2, and 724 in tier 3. I'll entertain questions shortly. I got 2 more slides and then some examples, but I'll pause just before the examples for discussion. So just kind of seeing where you guys fall against other communities in Massachusetts. So there's about 24 stormwater utilities in place in Massachusetts. These are some examples of just different rate structures. You can see a lot of them treat single family in a similar manner. They put them into one category. Sometimes they split those into more tiers. So you can see Shrewsbury, for example, has 3 tiers for residential. I didn't pick 3 just because of Shrewsbury, but it just happens that the data sometimes works out that way based upon the distribution of property types and development character of each community. You know, residential housing stock looks a certain way in some of the communities out in this area versus Metro Boston, right? Or out in Western Massachusetts, further west, where it's a little more rural. So you can see that we're in the range of about $100 per year for a typical single family residential property, but the devil's in the detail. So a lot of these, you can see that sometimes it gets up even higher. You know, Shrewsbury, $200 for 5,000 to 10,000. That would be your tier 3, essentially. You know, so just a point of comparison. What's important to understand too is what is it that they're funding? What program? What level of service? But also, what's the dollar amount that this is paying for, or that is the basis of this program? So you can see, we just compared the other dashboard communities. Franklin, similar program. Much different rate structures. That $56 per year sounds a lot less than what we're looking at. That's actually a little more than the tier 1 for you guys, but that's for typical. So for some of those higher, larger impervious area single family properties, they're paying substantially more than that to come up with that revenue gap. But it's in the same ballpark as, you know. So this is kind of similar approach, similar rate structures. Franklin has a flat rate, so that they're doing per 1,000 square feet for the larger properties. Reading has an ERU approach. Reading is one of the first stormwater utilities in the state. They were one of the first 3 or 4. So ERU approach was common, and they just haven't changed it since then. It's kind of, you know, if the revenue is coming in, there's no sense in changing it, whether it's fair or not. You know, that's for debate. Chicopee is a similar situation where it's one of the first. It actually is the first utility in the state. Much different rate structure that I would never recommend again. But not that it's bad. It's just that we have different ways to do it now that are a little more equitable, a little simpler in some ways. And so that's just kind of a snapshot. I guess I'll pause there. We can go back to any slides. I do have some information on the sort of makeup of impervious area across the community, and then some examples. I pulled the top 20 largest impervious area properties per Rod's comment. He wanted the top 10. I give you the top 20. So I can get into those. I thought I'd maybe just pause and see if you guys have any questions or want to discuss anything at this time.
Gene?
So I know you're talking about this program as funding the additional cost to catch up on some of the maintenance. Would the goal eventually be that this program would fund the entire cost of the stormwater program?
Yeah, so a full operations, fully burdened labor. I mean, yeah, what falls under stormwater is a bit more, but the intent was to fund the additional need, which is similar to what other communities do. those, if you look at their budget breakdown, and I know a couple of them, I did Franklin's, they don't transfer a lot of costs into the stormwater utility fund. You know, some things like street sweeping, you can say, okay, well, it's to keep the sediment out of the catch basin that I gotta clean, but it's also to keep the street clean. We do it anyway, regardless of stormwater regulations. There's some things that we do, no matter what, that are kind of blur the lines with highway operations. And what it ends up doing is if you shift it all in there, it's a pretty significant change in fees, not just for the end user, but also how the money's managed.
Sure.
And it's a bit more challenging out the gate. Not that it can't be modified later, but that's what we're proposing for now, if you wanna.
But maybe just to make sure I understand what you're asking, we would not, so if we pursued this fund,
Yeah,
we would not be asking for money, be spending money out of this fund and asking for money out of the general budget to fund stormwater operations and maintenance.
that's what I'm asking.
So there's going to be a staff member who does highway things that are paid out of this and stormwater stuff paid out of this. So that guy might get paid out
Sure.
of the general budget, but in terms of, just routine maintenance specifically for stormwater, it would all be funded out of this. We wouldn't be asking for money from two different locations, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was asking.
Just to follow, I'm sorry.
Go.
ahead. To follow up on his question, the first time you met with the finance team, and then I think, Chris, when you spoke with the capital equipment committee, you said there was a shortfall, and this program was intended to make up some shortfall in current maintenance of the culverts.
Yes.
Is that, the
Yes.
stormwater, is that correct?
But we do, in our budget right now, which is funded out of the general budget, so it's funded by taxes, we have lines that are for stormwater. And so those lines would be pulled out of the budget and moved into this
Yeah.
budget. And so we wouldn't be asking for money from two different places.
Right, and that's really what I was asking, yeah.
Okay.
And then, as a second question, and you might be getting to this later, you had talked about credits for certain, potentially for certain parcels.
Yeah.
Would it, are you seeing that this type of fee structure works as an incentive for people to have less, impervious area on their parcels, whatever that is, or to install, private catch basins, or, or is that really not?
So is your concern loss of revenue due to credits, or?
No,
or
I
trying
actually
to
was
use
to
it as an
incentivize
incentive?
people
Yeah.
to actually help with this, with the stormwater
Right.
issues. I was just wondering if this actually, if
Yeah.
you've seen evidence of this type of fee structure serving as an incentive
Yeah.
in other
So
communities.
it has to
or-
make sense economically. So if we offer a credit that's fairly generous, say 50%, that's fairly typical. There's some costs that are fixed that no matter what you do in your property, there's still a public system that we need to pay for.
Yeah,
So 50%, is a number that I quite often see, but we see typically 2 to 3% at most apply for credits.
Yeah.
In terms of revenue impact on this, so about a couple percent. So the issue with that is a lot of businesses, while they may have a detention basin on site, if it didn't meet current design standards, and they don't want to go through the hoops to submit an application that demonstrates it meets part of that credit or not, and we have to decide what we want to give credits for too. So typically it's to mitigate the cost of doing the work that's being funded. And there's not a lot that's going to be done by some of these properties to mitigate that. But you don't want to, quote unquote, punish people for having invested in stormwater. It does contribute to better stormwater management townwide, infiltration, things that benefit the community. In terms of being a really big carrot, businesses look at it as an operating expense. And they're the ones that have the greatest opportunity because they
Right.
typically have a higher fee. So 50% of their fee is a much more attractive number, but they still have to earn that.
Yep.
And they got to demonstrate that they're maintaining the system annually to do so. So credits are something we have not gotten into a ton of discussion with the town. that's really, credit policy is, I've seen a lot of communities spend a lot of time talking about credits. And at the end of the day, most
Yeah.
people don't pursue them anyway.
Yep.
In the city of Portland, Maine, I wrote their credit manual, and we offered 100% credit. We made it almost impossible to get. So it's a matter of, what are we trying to incentivize or encourage, or I wouldn't call it reward really, because you're paying more no matter what.
Right.
You're just paying a little less in some cases. But you can focus on water quality, water quantity. Those are both things that the town, and promoting more infiltration for groundwater resource protection and recharge. But in terms of, so it's a business decision. A lot of businesses will say, well, it's $5,000 a year. It's gonna cost me 10 to hire an engineer to submit the application. It's just easier just to absorb the cost. And it depends upon how it's passed on to the tenants. Is it just a, cost that's passed on for a lease property or something like that. So, we do still like to create programs that allow you to have the ability to give credits, even for non-residential, because it's a good thing. It's not gonna make a huge dent overall. A resident's paying $120 a year. He's not gonna, or that person's not gonna invest thousands of dollars to mitigate stormwater. It just doesn't make any sense. A lot of communities have chosen to give really easy, small credits, or like a rain barrel discount program, things like that encourage good behavior. But it's, you'll find that unless it's a significant number and that they are already in a good position where they don't have to spend a lot of money on infrastructure improvements, they might pursue credit, but it's a lot less than people think.
Yeah. Thanks.
Andrew, you have a question? Andrew? Okay, his hand
muted.
is up. Maybe
It's
you-
like this is frozen, maybe,
Are you muted, Andrew?
or no? Thought Derek was frozen.
Well, I guess not.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. I had two different mutes going on. There was one of the slides early on in the presentation broke down several different categories, and it included like $150 for pipes, and we had 300,000 of them. Total cost of $47 million. It was a breakdown of the different assets, and the catch basins were one of those different elements. My question is, as we look at that's the one. As we look at the way we're supporting each of these different assets, is the idea that right now we're talking about road number one, will we eventually be looking at leveraging sort of a fee structure for each of these? Or is there a reason that catch basins are more right for this sort of a strategy than some of these other ones?
So, it's a good question. We presented this information so that you guys could understand the number of structures, the rough order of magnitude of what it would cost to replace that, but we don't have to replace it all at once, thankfully. The DPW on a rolling basis does catch basin repair, catch basin replacement. So there's a certain amount of work that's done every year. The real major capital delta here is projects to replace larger infrastructure like culverts that require a substantial amount of work. They're more costly projects. There could be just drainage improvement projects that, and Chris can probably mention a couple over the years, where there's inadequate conveyance. It was never, maybe, the area was developed, it didn't have good stormwater controls, and the conveyance system was undersized for years ago. And so some of it is, it's not always, we're not just taking a line item for catch basins and chipping away at replacement of those. It's on an as-needed basis, and we use this to kind of frame the needs, but we do have specific projects that are the basis of the capital plan for the next 3 to 5 years minimum, which is that 1.5 million. A good portion of that 1.5 million. Well, does that answer your question, Andrew?
I think what I'm hearing you say is that this sort of management strategy isn't just a catch basin strategy, although we've talked about that stormwater being part of the budget lines and stuff like that. But this is, I guess, I'm not sure how to define the category of what this sort of work is, so we'd understand what it covers and what it doesn't. But it is not intended just specifically for that line item as I was drawing the connection.
No, so this this enterprise fund would cover everything related to stormwater operations and maintenance, just as, say, the water fund covers everything related to water. So it doesn't just pay for treatment of water, it pays, I'm talking the water fund, it pays for treatment, it pays for distribution, it pays for supply. So this would pay for everything on that list to some degree, depending on the need and the timeline associated. So it's not specific to any single aspect of stormwater management, it's the whole picture, if that helps.
Thank you kindly. Yeah, it does. I appreciate it.
Anything else? Any other questions? Rod?
Yeah, I had a few questions, and, you know, I think, as I understand, I think actually if you go to your next page, it seems like culverts are the biggest issue in terms, or,
Whoops. Well, so it's certainly a big item, and it's something that we've assessed in more detail.
okay.
So one of the challenges we have with these projects is no one's gone out and looked at every single pipe or catch basin. We know generally what's been done in the past. We are building that information to understand what the needs are. And for culverts, we've more specifically quantified that and done that assessment. However, it's still incomplete. There's culverts that are submerged, conditions that we just couldn't inspect at that time. So as we gain an understanding of the needs, the program evolves a little bit. We might start to allocate a little more money for catch basin repairs, but we've got a pretty significant backlog of projects that we know now that we want to get to before, you know, there's other issues, road failures or road collapse, et cetera.
So this specific information on culverts is only intended to be an example of the work that's out there. We used it because it's super recent, because it was part of the same grant that we're operating under now. And it's a hefty cost, as you can see, but there's plenty of other work out there that needs to be done that is captured in this $1.5 million. This is just one example of how that money would be spent. It would be to address some of these issues over time.
So I guess, you know, kind of what I see our role as the advisory finance committee is, you know, what does it cost for a homeowner or business to live or, you know, have a business in Westborough? And this is obviously an increase of costs that instead of being put towards an increase of taxes, which in my mind, you know, Chris would come to us with a project and say, we need to replace 12 culverts and we need $1.5 million this year, and we discussed whether that was in this year's budget. This sets up a revolving account that keeps that going. And in some ways, you know, depending on your perspective, it allocates more of that to the businesses as opposed to the homeowners, which, depending on your perspective, is a good idea or a bad idea. One of the reasons I had asked, you know, what are the top 10 or 20 businesses is just, you know, what would be the impact to a large business. If you go to the last page, your last list of top 10 or top 20. So if you had 1,000,003 square feet, how much would that cost 4,400 computer drive?
That's my next slide.
Right.
Yeah, I read your mind.
You had an advanced copy of the presentation.
I know. Well, we added this in based upon your feedback,
Yeah.
comments via email. So it's, yeah, we did quite read your mind. But we knew that this is always something that comes up is, okay, well, what are the impact of business? You want to make sure that it's not going to be, that can be adverse impacts. How is the cost really kind of shared? And it's an important discussion. So we look at some of those top users that are paying the highest amount of that fee. And so this is number one. This is the 1.34 million square feet of impervious area. So their fee under the tiered approach would be about $3,200 per month for that property. Now, we have to consider how it would look under a tax scenario, because the alternative is will we do a tax allocation, right? General fund allocation request every year, so there's obviously pros and cons to not having that dedicated source of revenue that we can plan based upon. And in some cases, for the non-residential properties, it generally results in a higher fee than they would normally pay via taxes. But arguably, they have a significant amount of impervious area, so we're really looking at what is the most appropriate or fair way, equitable way to distribute the cost. And there is opportunity for them to get credit. There's more opportunity for the non-residential properties than there are residential. One way, I've seen a lot of other communities, you could modify your rate structure and to a certain extent, but it also, at some point, it undermines the rationale. Why are we charging? Well, you contribute more to the system. More impervious area results in more runoff. You also have a business that uses the roads. And again, at the end of the day, it's the general public, right? So we're all in this together. It's going to come out of the business, but they're going to increase costs. We don't want it to be unfriendly to businesses. That's been a big concern in other communities. I've worked in other communities with split tax rate, so they don't want that to be a disproportionate burden. We've never seen the stormwater utility drive businesses out of town. There's so many other factors, and no one's going to all of a sudden pick up and say, it's too expensive here. The cost is increasing in other places too. And there's a lot of factors, and relocation costs are huge. It just so happens that there's a lot of non-residential properties with a lot of impervious area in Westborough. And that's what this table here shows. So you're looking at, and when I say non-residential, there's multifamily within that. So there's single family, and then the non-single family or all other properties includes multifamily. So there is still a residential portion to that. We're not just saying, this percentage is going to be put just on commercial or businesses, essentially. That cost is distributed across condos, and so we just do it in different ways in the rate structure. But those are essentially the rate payers. Yeah. So these are the top 20 properties, and it kind of, because there are a significant number of large properties, I picked 20. But also, if you look at, kind of towards the bottom range, 413,000 square feet. You're almost at 10 acres of impervious area. That's a lot. So these are really large properties with a lot of road, a lot of building, and in some cases they don't have any stormwater controls at all. So their own property is draining to something that is the public system that DPW then has to maintain at some point via culvert or other road infrastructure. It's in their best interest to make sure that the road to their facility, that culvert works, right? But we have to be, these are the numbers. Like this is all preliminary, and this can all change, and these numbers, can be tweaked, and there's a lot of work to do to refine this. But this is the snapshot. This is kind of what it means for these properties. So just take a look at the next largest property, which is Flanders Road, Cumberland Farms. So about $3,000 per month. If you look at it on the basis of taxes, it's obviously less. So this is where impervious area and property value don't have they don't always have the best relationship in terms of, what results in stormwater impact. So, you look at residential property. I mentioned this earlier. What's the median residential in Westborough? It's about 500,000, right? Single family, somewhere around that. 600 something. So you look at that value in relation to the impervious area for the typical single family, which is 4,200 square feet. You've got a property that's worth $40 million, but you've also got tens of acres of impervious area. So it's really just that's the fundamental difference in the rate or in the funding approach is associating with impervious area, which is really driving a lot of those costs, and it's a surrogate for that to measure that. This is number 3 in the list, and it happens to be a condominium development. I believe this is Derek corrected me in a meeting earlier today. I think there's about 176 units in this development. So when you kind of break this down, you look at, yes, it's $2,000 per month, but there's a lot of common impervious area. So it is, when you look at how that gets transferred, it's going to be transferred in the form of condo fees or whatever, however they choose to bill. But if you look at this and break it down, that $2,000 per month divided by 176, you're somewhere just above that tier 2 range for single family residential fees annually. So you're about 120 some odd per year. So it's we think of, this is a quote unquote non-single family residential property, but the residents that are occupying that will be paying the bill It's similar to the other residential properties. So common areas, common impervious areas, these are all private roads. We assess that as part of the fee structure. And then last, I just provided an example of a tax exempt property. So this is a church. This is what their fee would look like. It's about $123 per month. It's a good size parking lot. You know, we're over an acre impervious area. So just to get a sense of what does it look like for a tax exempt, how much of a burden do we think that might be? Because that's going to be a question that comes up. And there's ways to mitigate for that. We have seen, don't see too many communities exempt churches altogether or other tax exempt properties. You're going to have some good rationale for doing so. It also decreases your revenue, so the other ratepayers have to make up for that. And tax exempt properties pay utility bills for everything else. So, but we have to be cognizant of the fact that this is increased cost for everybody to meet a need that's not funded. So those are the examples I have. I mean, we can talk about other situations or.
Can I just add really quick to that? So kind of trying to bring this to a bigger like macro level, which is really where we are right now, and kind of the framework. So it's, I think at least the way I look at it, it's more of right now we're at a either a conceptual or maybe philosophical question, right? So it's, do we think this approach makes sense? And if it does, then we can figure out those details, because we all want to make sure that the impact to the resident or to the commercial side of the town is, you know, like we want to minimize that impact if we can, or make it make sense for everybody. But figuring out those things, kind of fine tuning those details really doesn't make any sense for us to do, because that costs us money, like real money. Like we have to pay him to figure that out, right? And there's no reason to spend that money if we just decide like we don't like this idea, let's just not do it, right? So I think it's a good idea, but that doesn't matter. Like if nobody else likes it and thinks it's a good idea, if the town doesn't support it, then there's no reason to continue any more work on it. And so it's really, what we're trying to get now is an understanding whether we think this is something that the town would support. And we don't know that, but we get a sense from you as a finance committee, we get a sense from the select board, you know, and we get some general, you know, azimuth on that. And then we say, okay, we think we're okay, let's go to town meeting. And we get some authorization at town meeting. We don't have to do that. We could keep plugging away at this, give more data, give more briefings, but that costs money, and it doesn't seem to make sense to do that if that's not really, if at the end of the day we're going to say no, right? So if we think we're going to be on board with this, and nobody's asking you for an answer right now, but certainly we take it if you had one. But that's where we are. We're trying to see if this is, do we want to take this to the next level? And the next level is getting money to spend the next 6, 8, 9, 12 months refining everything you just saw to get that rate, so the taxpayer knows, you know, what he's actually going to pay, whether you're a business or whether you're a homeowner, and you have a good sense of what that is. But if we say we're going to do it, at least they know it's coming, but we'll have time for people to debate, argue, and make their case for why it should be this level or this level, if that makes sense. But we don't want to do that if it doesn't.
It does, Kristen.
like
Let
it'd
me
be
let me
successful.
jump for 1 minute. Christy is on with us. Are you still there, Christy?
Yep, I'm here.
Yeah. What do you anticipate the select board is going to be looking for tomorrow night with respect to this subject? And do you have any sense of when they might make some kind of recommendation?
So I just got on the call, but I think that the board, when Chris presented this in December, was pretty clear that that they're interested in moving forward. Tomorrow night, they're going to be looking at, they're going to be wrapping up the presentation, and they're going to be looking at a draft bylaw. I think we're looking for a consensus from the board tomorrow night as to whether or not we'll continue to move forward for the March town meeting. And then the bylaw would go onto the warrant. So at that point, they would vote their support like they typically would. This has been a goal of the board for years to look into this. And it's something that the DPW has been working on. So the board's been waiting for this discussion.
So to summarize or recap that, tomorrow night is not any decision from the board. It's
Right.
some follow-up information. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is come to town meeting with a bylaw, which would give us the authority to implement this. And then a request for money to pay to implement it. And then over the next 12 months, we would do all the things, have all these discussions, decide on a rate, and then set an implementation date. And that's kind of the goal. We could delay the bylaw, but that's not, it's like I said, it's like, why keep spending money on something if we don't know, like, let's commit to it or not, and if we're not gonna commit to it, then let's not spend money on it. Like, I mean, we could, if somebody says otherwise, we can do that, but I just don't think we should spend money on something that we're not committed to. So that's why we're not kind of proposing anything other than what we're proposing, so.
All right, in the interest of time, Walter, go ahead.
Yeah, well, first, I'll just say, I think it's a good idea, but is there an efficiency of, so we're setting up another revolving fund, is there a cost to having, like, if you just increase the tax rate, there's no extra cost to that in the administration of that, but obviously this would have a bill or something, some way of paying it like we pay water, sewer bill. So I'm wondering, is that included in the numbers we're seeing? Like, I saw a person that was going to administer it, but the actual cost of paying the people online that collect the money for us and
So, so there is a lot, like the billing
Yeah.
through our staff we have already, who already do the water and sewer billing. So there's the rationale behind focusing on a rate structure that's kind of in the middle, which was that tiered approach versus the two others were on the either end of the spectrum, is because we want to minimize, we don't want to create a system that then requires 10 people to manage, that we don't have, right? So that was the thought process. So we would absorb the management of this with the staff we have initially.
Tom?
You'd hinted that setting up a separate fund, that some outside agencies might view that favorably in providing outside funding that wouldn't otherwise be available. That was a quick little minute. I may have.
Yeah. So by having dedicated funding that you can count on, you have, reserve money, or you have money that revenue is going to come in, you can pledge towards match. A lot of these programs require a certain level of match. This project was a grant, but it was only, I think it was a 60% grant. 40% was made up from cash from DPW General Fund and personnel time. So that's in-kind service match. So it allows you to leverage this money further. But not having to go to town meeting each time to appropriate money to provide that as match means it really limits your ability to take the opportunity for all these existing programs that come along the way. So you have to make appropriations specifically for each of those as they came up. And quite often you're going to miss the cycle on that. So it allows projects, in some of those funding sources require that you design the project up front before you can submit. So you need design money or seed money just to get going and have kind of shovel-ready projects, and then you can start to tap additional resources. We can look at congressional earmarks for some high-priority projects. So there's a lot of, SRF is a state revolving fund for clean water, can be used for stormwater. So it's low interest loans, as well as, we'd want to obviously maximize grant opportunities. But you need the agencies, you need to be able to pledge at the time of the application that you have matching funds. And that's a real big challenge when you don't have dedicated revenue.
That's just something that sort of excites me, the ability to spend other people's money. So if we can figure out, that seems like a side spin. in a good way.
Well, in
On,
some ways, it's your own money that you
it always is.
paid to the
just
feds.
came
and
out of
Left
your
pocket,
wallet.
right pocket. It's always your money,
Getting
but,
some of that back.
but
right?
getting it back.
Getting it back.
Yeah,
There you
that
go.
we wouldn't otherwise be able to even be at the table for.
Thank you. Okay.
I guess my only comment, and I think Chris is right, it's a philosophical question. You know, is this part of something that's just part of, you know, the general funds that get distributed through the town, or do we set up an enterprise? And, you know, my feeling is not to create a separate fund that continue to, as project, and believe me, as an engineer, I'm all for maintaining our streams and culverts and all that, but I just think there's a certain amount of bureaucracy of setting up a separate fund, and I do think it will, you know, some of the big payers who are already in town, they're going to get, in terms of businesses, are going to get hit with a fund that they're already here. You're right, they're not going to leave, but they're forced to pay this additional fund.
Okay, in the interest of time, let's move forward quickly. Can you, with the rest of your presentation?
That's
And
it.
that's it. Done?
Right.
Any other questions?
Yeah,
Okay.
I guess I would just add to what you're saying. So, in terms of the setup, there's really a one-time setup cost, which is what Chris mentioned would be a warrant article. A town meeting, we're proposing a preliminary budget of about $150,000. That's all your initial setup cost. And what it also does is it gives you better data that helps meet some of your other program objectives. So communities have moved forward to implementation and then paused. Not that we suggest doing that. Like Chris said, you're spending money, you want to make sure you reach your goal. But that benefits the program overall as well. We refine what the capital projects are. We come up with a more detailed prioritization list in some cases. So it's not just about creating an account and bringing in money into that account. Leveraging it for outside resources and other funding opportunities, that's a huge benefit to that. It's also having more transparency in that we have dedicated funding for this program, that it's only going to be used for that. We're not going to compete each year because, quite honestly, we wouldn't be here unless there was adequate money already that Chris is able to get and justify year after year after year. The revenue has not been there consistently. And there's projects that'll absorb. If you say we're doing it on a cash flow basis, one project could absorb 50 to 75% of your entire budget for that year. So we would need to have revenue that we can pledge for debt service. We can't do that unless we have an account with a steady, dedicated source of revenue. Obviously, we can do borrowing in many ways. I'm not going to try to teach you guys about finance here, but so and I think you understand there are other advantages of having a dedicated account. What we talked about was internally not creating more bureaucracy. So trying to minimize the level of effort associated with data updates, billing, so that's handled within existing resources. And this is really geared towards making sure we have the sustainable capital that we can count on each year. So
I
Just
thought you
to add to that.
did a great presentation. It was very compelling.
Yeah. So is the committee comfortable this evening? Do you feel you have enough information to recommend that this move forward to the next steps, which would be to go to the select board meeting tomorrow night and see about potential action on that draft bylaw? Okay, Beth and Andrew, you comfortable?
I'm prepared for feedback, yep.
Okay,
No questions at this time.
okay. Want to make a motion?
Like a motion that we
Do-
would recommend.
Move forward.
Oh, okay. Yes, it's a little complicated. I move.
Just read the first line.
I can't read that. No, I move that we recommend the continued investigation of this approach. Is that the sort of thing you're looking for, or
No,
you want to support this approach?
there you
Okay.
go.
Yes.
I move that we recommend the support of this approach.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Beth?
Blumberg, yes.
Andrew?
Bradley, yes?
Dolan, yes?
Leslie, yes.
McMahon, yes.
Shafford, no.
Moretti, yes. Let's
All
go
right.
to the
Thank
next
you very
step.
much.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much, gentlemen.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate your time. Archie, we haven't forgotten about you.
She's taking notes.
He's taking notes.
610.
All right. Thank you again.
Thank you.
And Derek.
Oh, and Derek. Thank you, Derek. Quiet man.
Even had his camera on, too.
Okay. Next order of business is Town Manager Christy Williams is going to review some of the highlights of the 2024 proposed budget. So, Christy?
Thanks. I was gonna share my screen, but it won't let me, so I guess we can just talk through the presentation, but.
Well, we have the books.
Okay, that's fine. So just, as Mike said, the purpose of this is not the budget hearing. The budget hearing will happen on January 24th at the select board meeting. And then we'll talk obviously in more detail about, some of the budgets and warrant articles, at the January 26th budget summit meeting. So, what I wanted to walk through, not necessarily the information within the book, but just sort of a guide to the book, which, because we do know, especially this year, this book is 1,200 pages. And so we just want to make it a little less daunting in terms of document and just kind of talk through where people can go to find different areas of information. So, I'm just going to walk through the book. So the first page of the book is the Citizen's Guide to the Budget. If you go online and you look at the, if you go online and you look at the PDF version, actually it looks like I can share that now. So let me try to do that. So if you go online and you look at the PDF version, you can use the bookmark tab on the side. So the first page is the Citizen's Guide to the Budget. All of these bolded references, you can click on and you can click right to the document that it's referring to. The second, the next part is the budget message, and this is something that I draft with help from the finance team. And again, all of these bolded reference documents can be clicked on, so people can jump right to different portions of it. This year, we've added information about the budget process. There's also a budget calendar in the appendix. We also talked more specifically this year about the American Rescue Plan project, so giving some information about the money that we've received and the process that we've gone through, with a table here showing everything that's been awarded to date and what is remaining. Information with budget summary, so town salary and wages, expenses, school budget, fixed costs, things like that, shown in the table here. And then the history of the property tax and other things from FY21. So then we always include this commercial, industrial, personal property versus residential chart, average single family tax bill. And then we talk about expenditures and revenues briefly, as well as the data dashboard communities, because we use a lot of that data throughout the document to show where we stand next to our data dashboard communities. Scrolling through this, starting on page 10 is the budget highlights. So that's some things that are really different about the FY24 budget. So you'll see here, this is where we'll talk about any major increases, any additional staff, what the cost of that is to add, and any alternative funding sources that we might have to cover these costs. So if you walk through the budget highlights, it's probably one of the easiest areas to find kind of the new and different things in the upcoming budget. we talk about insurance. That's not new, but it's always something that, is obviously a large cost in our budget. We talk about revenues. We get a lot of questions about the Pulte money and the different kinds of Pulte money. So those are the Del Webb Chauncey stabilization funds as well as mitigation. And then we provide some information about debt and the capital improvement plan, any use of free cash, and then the 5-year financial forecast. We do get questions a lot about, how we do forecast, if we forecast. Here, we speak to it briefly, but again, in the appendix, we have the full data of our 5-year financial forecast. So we give other projections. I'm not going to walk through every page of this, and then we talk about capital projects and then the conclusion of the budget message. So those first probably 10 to 15 pages of budget message really focuses a lot on things that are upcoming and maybe different in the upcoming budget year. So in this case, FY24. We do a lot of tables to provide different ways to show information. So this is the budget summary, different tables of their expenditures, operating budget to show where the different costs lie. We always show this organizational chart, which shows really where everybody sits on our plan. And then this year, for the first time, we've created the full-time equivalent or FTE chart. And that shows the number of employees since FY20 in all of the town departments. The budget table is probably very useful to your committee as you're talking to different department heads. And this really shows the dollar amount and percentage change over the FY23 budget. And so all the departments are listed here. And that's a single tab in your budget books. After that is the community profile, where we give some information about businesses that have come to town, our bond rating, other things that we're proud of. And then we talk about this year we talked a lot about the community plans, which we talked a lot about at the fall budget summit. So strategic plan, climate action plan, and master plan are 3 of kind of the major driving documents as we look at how we're moving forward and what we're spending money on. Westborough at a glance, we just provide some basic data, as well as different charts to show where we've been. Different values. I want to go through all. We pulled out for local receipts. We pull out some of the major contributors of our local receipts. So giving you a historic look at motor vehicle excise, the local meals tax, which obviously you can see the impacts of COVID in some of these, and then the room occupancy excise tax as well, and ambulance receipts. On page 44, we talk about town meeting, but on here we also talk about any anticipated articles that are going to be proposed as a raise and appropriate. So these are the ones that we were aware of at the time we put the budget document together. And then we're working right now on the upcoming warrant. And then within this document, we have the strategic plan. So I had mentioned it actually at our December town meeting, but it's pretty detailed here related to our strategic plan and all of the initiatives, as well as the status of those initiatives, giving detail about, if things are complete, what we've done to complete them, and then where we're at as they're ongoing. So that's several pages related to the initiatives of the strategic plan. This year, we've also added some information about the master plan, understanding that the implementation committee has just gotten started. So not necessarily giving status, but just giving a little more detail about what's in the master plan and what to expect. And that's also true with the climate action plan. So we have some more information about that as a driving document that contributes to the budget. In our budget overview, we talk a lot about the different revenues, so taxes. Just wanted to pull your attention here. So we give a little more detail. Within all of the verbiage, we talk about increases for the upcoming year, anticipated increases. So we talk about the different revenues, what they are, where they come from, and what we're anticipating. So you can see here all the different things that you typically hear about related to different revenues. State revenues, talking about, unrestricted local aid as well as Chapter 70. And then we talk about free cash. And when we go to the expenditure overview, that's where we are sort of grouping different departments. So you can see that general government as a group has increased 6.1% as an example. And so you can see within general government what the drivers are of that. So this one talks about an additional proposed position and some IT increases that we'll be asking for FY24. But that's also true when we look at community development as a group, public safety, insurance, public works, really just a grouping of departments and areas of service. We have a whole section on enterprise funds, so really understanding what the enterprise fund is and how it functions. So we show all of those individually here. And then different state assessments that the town pays. So those are all listed here. Inclusive of that is the Assabet Valley Regional Technical Assessment. And then we get into the detailed budget information. So you can see that that's a tab in your book as well. And this just gives an outline of what you'll see in each of the sections. So all of the departments, again, are grouped similar to what I just showed you, general government, community development, and so on. And then I won't go through all those, but in each of those, you can expect to find information about the department mission, description, personnel. As I mentioned, we have charts in there that show the different FTEs and any change that's happened over the past couple of years. The departmental budget, which is a line item budget that's provided, performance measures, successes and accomplishments. Each department right now speaks to the strategic plan initiatives that they're involved in and the work that they're doing towards that, as well as giving information on short and long-term goals. So that's the next few hundred pages is all of that work, and all of those are done by our department heads. The narrative, the photos, all of it's a lot of really good information. And then we have a whole section on debt, as well as the capital improvement plan, which gives the upcoming capital budget, and as well as all of the detail sheets that were reviewed by the capital committee that look like this. And then our appendix, which we've added this year, the climate action plan and the master plan, which really contribute a lot to the length of this year's documents. But then within this, we have some other additional information. As I mentioned, the 5-year financial forecast, the debt maturity schedule, which a lot of folks are interested in. And then we have the glossary of terms to really, for understanding if folks are in need of that information. And that's the whole document. So I appreciate you giving me the time to go through it. I do think that, it can be daunting, but we really want it to be a tool. And we really want it to be a tool for everyone who's making decisions about this stuff, but also, and everyone in the community. And we want it to be a communication tool as well, so that people can understand, what the different asks are, but also just what we do every day. So.
Questions, comments, gentlemen? Beth? Andrew?
All set, thank you.
Thanks.
I have one comment.
Yeah, go ahead, Ron.
Having looked at it for the first time, it's both daunting and very impressive. So nice work, Christie and gang. The only question I had, and this is simple, and I'm sure we'll get into it, is on 20, there's a revenue line item in 22 and 23, and an expenditure line item on 24 and 25. Are those supposed to match up, or how does that work? Maybe this is for a longer discussion at our day-long meeting, but that's...
Yeah.
I don't know what page you're looking at.
So if you look at the total operating budget of 139 million estimated, and then expenditures of 137 million, which is the recommended budget, how and when do those reconcile?
I'm just trying to find what you're looking at. What page are you on?
22 and 24. So on the bottom of 24, the estimated revenue was 139 million.
Right.
And then on your 24, if you go to the recommended budget, it's 137 million. And we don't have to go, I'm sure on our day-long
That's
thing.
okay.
we'll
I'm
talk
just
about
trying to see it. So yeah, maybe we can talk about it at the budget summit. I just am not seeing it.
Yeah, I have one other comment, Christie. For
Okay.
those of us who need to wear glasses to read, even with reading glasses, some of the pages have data that is almost impossible to read. So for next time, this is an award-winning budget, by the way.
Yeah,
just
no,
so
no,
you
it's
know.
it's very good.
So for next time, you might want to use,
The only thing I couldn't read was the pavement management.
yeah, the
summary.
pavement management summary.
I was trying to look up our street.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, noted. Thank you.
Thanks. Debt maturity. Yeah, debt maturity, too, yeah. Anything else? Mr. Savoy, you have a question?
Wilfred Savoy, 41 Chestnut Street. I'm particularly interested in the page, last year's budget was 73. It is entitled
can't hear.
Detailed Budget Information. And when you were
I second
going...
that. I can't hear anything coming from the room.
Yeah.
Try bringing that.
Bring that to the microphone. There you go.
This sheet basically describes what,
Still not coming through. I'm sorry.
okay,
Did Aiden shut off that?
what we would expect to see of the individual department presentations, what would be included in it. And it talks about wages and salaries, expenses, historical, current, budget numbers, and so forth. And my question is the school department doesn't seem to follow this format. I've asked at several meetings why that is, or if they could modify their presentation. In other words, 83% of the school budget is salaries and wages. And they have basically, fundamentally, one line showing that number. There is no breakdown like what the town departments do. And I'm wondering who's responsible for ensuring that the presentation is consistent with the town.
So the superintendent and school committee put their book together, and I know that they have been working towards, I know that they've been providing some additional information to line up with what the way that we've been presenting our budget. I know I've worked with the superintendent on that, but there's no requirement that their presentation look the same.
Well, there is a requirement in terms of the law and their own association, the Mass Association of School Committees, finds that wages and salaries should be delineated and detailed by cost section or cost centers. So I brought this up at several meetings at the school committee to encourage them and to ask them if they would consider detailing that information to give a true picture of what the costs are for schools, for the district, for facilities and so forth if you don't include the salaries. All they include is expenditures. So my question basically is it the Finance Committee's responsibility to bring them in line? Is it the town's responsibility to bring in line? Or is it town meeting? Is it the citizens' responsibility to say, this is the type of information we would like to see from the school department? Where does that lie?
I mean, I don't have their budget book in front of me, but I would make the request of the superintendent and the school committee. When we changed our format, that was something that I did, with the select board and the town departments.
Well, I didn't quite hear what you said. I didn't hear what you said. What did you say?
You would make the request of the school committee and the superintendent.
So it's the school committee basically making the decision of what the format will be.
Well, the school
I
committee's
know Beth is shaking her head no, so I don't know what she's referring to, but I can tell you that our book was decided, the format of our book was decided by myself as town manager.
Okay.
So.
Right.
This has been addressed by the school department in the past, and things may have changed, but they do their budget book and their budget to comply with the Department of Education's requirements for how they present their budget.
No. No, that's, the Department of Education, it is a law in which and how the detailed information is presented. So all I'm asking for is detailed information on wages and salaries to be included in the functions by schools, by district, whereas right now, 83% of their budget is basically one line item. I don't know how we can really look at, and I'm not accusing anyone of any nefarious activities. All I'm saying is that the budget should be a lot clearer than what it is. And I want to know whose responsibility it is to make that happen. Is it the town meeting? Is it citizens?
You elect the school board,
Right.
they're the responsibles for running the schools and
Okay.
organizing the schools.
Okay. Basically, what they've told me is that what they have presented at town meeting has been satisfactory over the years. And so they continue to use the same format. So what you're saying to me is that if the town meeting is satisfied with the budget presentation, that's the way it is. But if we are not, then they would change it.
So there's I guess a difference between the budget book as we were just discussing and the way that it's voted on at town meeting. So if you're talking about the way it's voted on at town meeting, that's how it is, required as that single number that the finance committee puts in their report.
And that's because the total number is under the purview of the school board. And as a town, we just vote a total number.
Yes.
Right.
If you're interested in the breakdown, there are documents, like I'm looking at one here that has salaries by types, and then they have by schools and things like that.
You have that in,
It's in the
on the
book.
school department?
It's in the school department
school
budget
budget.
book.
Okay, so
Right.
I haven't seen that. yeah.
Okay.
They have a separate budget book.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's online.
okay,
Thank you, Mr.
thank you.
Savoy. Appreciate it.
thank you.
Okay. Anything else for the town manager? Okay.
Great
Christie,
book.
thank you. Yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Happy reading. See you on the By the way, turns out that Mr. Dolan did in fact have his books. So I'm going to leave the extra copies here on the table and perhaps
Okay.
somebody can pick them up tomorrow.
I'll grab them. Yeah.
Okay.
That extra page, do you want me to just speak to that or did people grab it?
We gave it to them,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, so if you had already picked up your book, we just found that there was an error, so we just printed that new page if you want to put that in your books.
Thank you.
Okay.
When did that happen?
Did you get the extra page?
It would happen right before New Year's.
Okay, so if I picked up my books recently.
Yeah, it should be all set. Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
yep. Okay,
Okay.
thanks.
Thank you, Christy.
Okay,
Have a good rest of your evening.
you too.
It might be page 81, he said might be.
Yeah,
No, it's a replacement.
All right, moving on so we could get this meeting wrapped up in a reasonable time. Any liaison reports?
I could just mention quickly that the Library Building Committee has been meeting, and I would expect that there will be likely an article for some design work of the repair at this town meeting.
Okay. And for those of you who are aware, or maybe not, the Regional Veteran Services Officer resigned in November. That's an important position because the budget actually coalesces in that office, the veterans' budget. And we also lost our local Veteran Services Officer in the summer. He retired. We didn't, just to make that clear. John Gallinoy, yeah, a lot of service to the country and the town. So they're in the process of hiring the regional manager, and they anticipate having something positive to report in early February. So, okay, if there are no other liaison reports, moving on, future draft agendas. The most important thing coming up in our near future is the Budget Summit. It's on the 26th, which is a Thursday, and it actually starts at 8:30. I've received a draft agenda, which is still being reviewed, and as soon as that's finalized, I'll get it out to you. It'll start at 8:30, and you can anticipate that it will wrap up sometime around 3 o'clock. Just as an aside, if the past is any guide, this is a BYO drinks and snacks. I'm not sure if they're going to provide lunch. I think they did last year. Yeah, so, but for the remainder of the day, it's on you. And finally,
Mike,
yes,
is that,
across the street in the Great Hall, thank you.
The room with the echo.
Yeah, the room with the echo. I'm working on a calendar for our vote, for our meetings going forward. I'm going to run it by Walter because he's going to have to live with part of it. And
Away again?
so I'll get that out to you as soon as possible. We will be required to vote for a new chair and a new vice chair at the either the conclusion of the ATM, which is right now March 25th, and or we'll, if there's no time there, we'll do it in a meeting immediately following the next week. So it looks like we're going to have a busy agenda for the next 3 months. And thank you to for Walter for putting together that chart of our meetings. And so January and February are busy. January, February, and March are going to be busy. The crescendo will build to February, and
We have a chart? Or it's in the works?
well, you should have seen it when you were recruited.
I'll send it out.
Oh,
Walter will send it out.
the typical one.
So thank you to our two citizens, Mr. Savoy and Mrs. Clapp. Thank you for bearing with us. And could I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Bradley, second.
Okay. Any discussion?
Blumberg, yes.
Bradley, yes.
Dolan, yes.
McMahon, yes. Oh,
That's
sorry.
all right, that's all right. Leslie left, yes.
Jafford, yes.
Moretti, yes. We'll see you all on the 26th.